Bad news on France's fertility rate pushed the nation's president into an immediate announcement. Emmanuel Macron told a January 16 press conference that parents will soon be entitled to 6 months maternity leave, as part of a demographic rearmament for the country.
The birth rate is falling because infertility is on the rise. Habits are changing, people are having children later and later, and infertility in both men and women has risen sharply in recent years, causing many couples to suffer. So here it is, a major plan to combat this scourge will be launched to enable us to rearm ourselves demographically.
The president has yet to reveal the full specifics of his plan, but the scale of the problem is clear. Only 678,000 babies were born in France in 2023. This is the lowest number of births in a single year since 1946, according to the West France newspaper. It is a fact that at 1.68 children per woman, France remains the most fertile country in Europe, along with Romania and the Czech Republic, but this sliver of good news has no purchase within the hexagon. The country never misses an opportunity for a collective panic, and the official declaration of plummeting fertility rates may have had some people reaching for their antidepressants. Macron's opponents immediately denounced the war metaphor and the weaponization of women's wombs. Whispering behind their hands, they wondered how a childless middle-aged man, who married his school teacher, who was some 25 years older, dare call on French women to produce plus d'enfants. The Humanity newspaper speculated on what might be included in the president's fertility plan.
Will the government tackle pesticides and insecticides, which are partly responsible for infertility? Will it combat job insecurity and unemployment, which discourage many young people from conceiving a child? Will he reopen local maternity wards and public creches, which he and successive governments have conscientiously endeavored to close? Will he introduce effective measures to combat pay inequalities between men and women? Will he finally realize that immigration is a key factor in the country's future and reverse his law? Will he give us hope for better days?
Immigration. In France, the immigration train is never late. Indeed, it is the destination of almost every social and political question the country currently confronts. Macron used the phrase rearmament, when he referred to civic rearmament, as part of the presidential struggle against what he previously described as decivilization in the country. But his use of demographic rearmament touched a political nerve that was surely intended. In France, Renaud Camus' great replacement nightmare is constantly on the lips of the political class. In a February 2022 Paris meeting with supporters, Valérie Pécresse, the Republican Party presidential candidate, referred to the conspiracy theory that mass migration is the means by which whites are being demographically and culturally replaced by non-white peoples, especially from Muslim-majority countries. What seemed astonishing then is commonplace now. Eric Zemmour, the journalist-turned-extremist politician, has built his appeal and book sales on the idea that there really is a scheme afoot to replace white French people with an African Muslim horde. Believers in the Great Replacement will not hear that France's migrant population is the result of the country's rapacious colonial policies, environmental devastation in the global south, and the country's need for cheap labor in sectors such as agriculture, construction, hospitality, and health. Instead, they cite, as prima facie evidence, the infamous campaign speech of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who in 2017 urged Turks living in Europe to have more children, to counter the West's injustices.
Go live in better neighborhoods. Drive the best cars. Live in the best houses. Make not 3, but 5 children. Because you are the future of Europe. That will be the best response to the injustices against you.
President Erdogan was speaking in the city of Eskişehir, while campaigning for a referendum to confirm his power, but his words reached far beyond the city limits. European infertility is the silent driver of white nationalism rising across the continent. President Macron's use of demographic rearmament spoke to the French obsession with a future civil war that will, according to Zemmour, pit white French people and their allies against those of immigrant origin. In France, there is no limit to political hyperbole. When riots peppered France last summer, following the police shooting of a teenager of North African origin, who accelerated away from a traffic stop, Zemmour's assessment was apocalyptic and on message.
We are in the early stages of a civil war. It's an ethnic and racial war, and we can clearly see the forces at work. We need someone who is determined and firm. If I had been in power, I would have stopped immigration first. I would have abolished the right to legal residency. I would have stopped family reunification. I would have limited the number of students to almost nothing. I would have deported delinquents, criminals at the end of their sentences, and people unemployed for more than 6 months.
And Zemmour is not alone in his doom-laden messaging, leaving onlookers to wonder if modern France is really in danger of collapse. Marine Le Pen need say nary a word, because she is the known inheritor of the family brand of toxic anti-migrant politics. It is Le Pen who is credited with inspiring France's recent immigration bill. The Guardian newspaper certainly pins the political tail on the French donkey.
A key part of the bill was that some social security benefits for foreigners should be conditional on having spent 5 years in France, or 30 months for those with jobs. The left-wing opposition said this amounted to Macron copying the controversial Central Manifesto pledge of decades of far-right politics under Jean-Marie Le Pen and his daughter Marine Le Pen. The notion of national preference, in which benefits and housing should be for the French first.
Marine Le Pen's sidekick Jordan Bardella is another political rainmaker, who regularly shares his opinions on migration with the country's television and radio listeners. He gave the following reply to a BFM TV journalist when asked about Camus theory.
I don't like the word great replacement because it's not clear. It's a very intellectual slogan, but it points to a reality that's right. Go and take a walk around all the neighborhoods where I grew up. There is a demographic shift that could lead to fears that the face of France will change in a few years' time, and this is already happening.
So, conscious of the tone of this political debate and its impact on French voters, Macron rallied his troops with a dog whistle about demographic rearmament. Migrants are a subject treated with as much fear and apprehension as Paris receiving a foreign policy communiqué from Adolf Hitler circa 1938. Look at the reaction to National Statistics Agency INSEE's announcement in 2021 that 1/10 of people living in France were born foreigners. INSEE's first research in a decade revealed that
almost 7 million people, or 10.3% of all people in France that year, were immigrants, meaning born a foreigner in a foreign country. In comparison, 6.5% of French residents hailed from abroad in 1968. More than a third of immigrants in France in 2021 had acquired French citizenship.
the country's population is changing because France's colonial chickens are coming home to roost. Will a changing demographic bring changes? Surely. Will those changes transform France into the nightmares of Eric Zemmour's imagination? Of course not. For a start, France is the most policed country in Europe. But this is hardly the point. Despite claims that automation and artificial intelligence hold the answers to a declining birth rate, it is black and brown people who will pick the nation's crops, cook its food, drive its buses, build its homes, and take care of its elderly in the years to come. If migrant brawn is an economic asset, then migrants' ethnicity and religion are the political gifts that keep on giving. Just 2 years ago, Ukrainians, fleeing a Russian invasion, were greeted with open arms and multi-level assistance. It was the right and decent thing to do. Sub-Saharan Africans desperate for safe havens, or Iraqis escaping the devastation in their country, receive a wholly different welcome. That's politics. French presidents love nothing more than to play with racist fire, so as to burn their opponents. In the 1980s, the aging François Mitterrand raised up Jean-Marie Le Pen like a pit bull puppy, hoping to weaken the more established center-right parties. President Nicolas Sarkozy asset-stripped the National Front to win power in 2007. And now Macron, 3 years from the end of his final mandate as president, can obsess, night and day, about a winning strategy to defeat the far-right threat. Many pundits claim that Macron's decision to dispense with the boring Elisabeth Borne and promote the dazzling former Education Minister Gabriel Attal to the post of Prime Minister was made with an eye on the 2027 presidential contest. It remains to be seen whether Macron has deliberately skipped a generation to pass his political mantle to a 34-year-old professional politician, or whether a deeply conservative country will vote in, as president, an openly gay man. What is certain is that France's European election battle next June will be dominated by the parties of the center and the far right. Low fertility, in the words of the far right, means that the country's tolerance of migrants will continue. That is why Adol's approval rating soared when he banned children from wearing Muslim garments to school. The country's thirst for debates over halal meat in school, public Muslim prayers, school uniforms, mosque construction, and so on, seems unquenchable because they are, in truth, conversations by proxy about migration. Zemmour, Bardella, and a legion of other French politicians are all over the airwaves, prophesying the coming civil war. Migrants are considered a plague on the country, and immediate radical measures are needed to get France going again. The country has its problems. Macron's is accused of being too business-friendly. The Gilets jaunes movement and street demonstrations against the government's retirement plans lend themselves to a declinist narrative that is widely popular and is stoked nightly on French television by the far right. Yet, look closely, and France is hardly the sick man of Europe. On the contrary, most economists say France is doing better than Germany, the EU's perennial yardstick for economic competence and efficiency. So are migrants carrying the can for growing pessimism caused by neoliberal reforms brought in by Macron's government? That is a subject for another podcast. Thanks for listening.